You all heard it, hopefully. Meeting's being recorded just so everyone's aware.
Well, we've got to 10:01, so we'll go ahead and I'll call the meeting to order. This is the June 8th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Before we get started, I'll read our regular announcement. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who does not use their full name or acts inappropriately. I'm Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And I'm Mary Longacre. We have two members who we know are not expected today, and two others that I hope will be able to join us shortly. Actually, there's one coming in right now. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And anticipated speakers on the agenda, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Trevor Johnson.
Here.
And Devin McGee.
Here.
Both representing the Arcadis Group, our Coastal Resilience Plan Consultant team. And we have member Sarah Boyce, who's just joining us. Sarah, you want to say hello?
Hi, here.
All right. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your computer or phone when you're not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public who have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And just a note to the public that if you're not able to attend the meeting in person, you can submit comments to Vince Murphy by email, vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov, or and otherwise in advance of the meeting to be included in the meeting's record. All right. So this morning we have, as I said, Trevor Johnson and Devin McGee from the Arcadis Group. They will be talking to us about the upcoming open house. And if before you get started, Trevor or Devin, I wondered if you have a quick count of how many people have registered so far for that event. Trevor, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, do. We have currently 37 RSVPs, which is, I think, obviously we want to get much higher than that, but a strong foundation for the next few weeks of, I think, more intense promotion.
Thank you. All right, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Good to see you again, and thanks for having us. Look forward to talking about the open house that's slated for about 2.5 weeks from now. Before jumping into the presentation, I just want to introduce a member of our team, Devin McGee, who's recently joined Arcadis about a month ago, and brings a really strong background in coastal zone management, risk communication, community engagement. She's based in Massachusetts and will be participating in this project in the last bit here as we move towards September. So I'll turn it over to Devin just to introduce herself and say a bit more about her background. And hopefully you'll have a chance to talk with her a bit more in the coming months.
Great, thank you, Devin.
Thanks, Trevor. Nice to meet you all. So as Trevor mentioned, my background is in coastal management. I studied at Duke, did my master's there, and then spent a couple years with Michael Baker, which is another engineering firm. While I was there, I did some flood risk mapping, which was a lot of fun. I learned a little bit about modeling wave hazards and did a lot of work supporting FEMA in their coastal risk communication project. So creating a whole lot of outreach deliverables and story maps, things like that. So excited to get involved in this project.
Great, thanks, Devin. And yeah, I think Devin's been playing a role in shaping our open house format and structure here, bringing that background in kind of communication with the public. So look forward to chatting with you about that today. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll jump into the presentation. Just one moment. All right. Can you all see my screen with the presentation? Great. So firstly, just the project mission, a reminder for those who may be joining this meeting for the first time, and although I don't think anybody from the public is on just yet, but the project mission for the Nantucket Coastal Resilience Plan is to draw on the cherished, built, and natural heritage of Nantucket to build a community-supported roadmap to implementation for a series of layered flood control and adaptation approaches. We're going to coordinate with other ongoing adaptation and sustainability initiatives to address the whole island and county while respecting the unique characteristics of each neighborhood. Driven by the inclusive and equitable engagement of all, the plan aspires to create social, environmental, and economic benefits and value to everyone who will share in Nantucket's future. Today's conversation really has 3 topics. The first is to provide an overview of and refine with all of you the plan for our open house number 2. We will then discuss kind of steps that we're taking and how we can partner with CRAC membership to promote open house number 2 over the next 2 weeks. And then finally, we'll discuss options that we've prepared for utilizing the project budget that's been allocated for additional services, and think about how to strategically deploy that, that portion of the budget in service of the CRP and implementation of the recommendations. I should have mentioned at the outset, we'll walk through a number of slides here, and then we'll pause for a group discussion as we move through between each section of the agenda. So just a reminder on where we are in the process. Obviously, we're in kind of mid-June here. Or close to mid-June, and we're gearing up for our second open house. We're in the kind of midstream in the process of developing our resilience, coastal resilience and adaptation scenarios and strategies. And that is very much why we need to have the second open house, as we've prepared kind of our initial hypotheses, or are preparing our initial hypotheses for resilient strategies, and really look forward to discussing those with the community as we'll continue to refine those and developing kind of implementation pathways for the priority recommendations that will be in the final CRP that is again slated for September of this year. And just a framework for kind of where we are and how we're developing this. This was a slide that I shared kind of briefly in our last conversation a couple months ago, and just wanted to reinforce kind of how everything that we've talked about so far fits together, and will inform the strategies that we'll look forward to discussing with the community, the open house, and subsequent engagement. So kind of have the vision for Resilient Nantucket that was developed and refined through our first segment of community engagement in the fall and winter. Coastal risk, as we discussed during the mid-project update, was a heavy focus for us over the winter as we developed the mid-project report. We look forward to continuing to refine and think about what risk means in the context of Nantucket throughout the rest of the project here. Developing the Coastal Resilience Toolkit, we'll talk a little bit more about that today, and also in the context of the strategy development. This is based on kind of our subject matter expertise and knowledge of the area, refined with understanding of risk and engagement, and then continue to be refined in thinking about how we deploy a toolkit of different resilience approaches and strategies towards a holistic resilience building approach for Nantucket. The evaluation criteria we discussed many months ago at this point is really kind of a filter through which we send our toolkit, the risk, the vision, all of it is kind of filtered through the evaluation criteria that we co-defined towards development of strategies. And what we'll talk about during the open house is our hypothesis, right? Is taking everything that we've learned so far through this process and putting forth some preliminary ideas that really are a platform for discussing with the community what these things look like. What does a resilient strategy actually look like? What does it mean for the community in different locations? And we can use the feedback that we receive through the open house to refine those strategies, or sort of circle back and redevelop new strategies perhaps before we begin sort of more detailed technical analysis around engineering and then project prioritization and implementation planning. So why do we need to have an open house number 2 besides the fact that we said we would in our proposal? It's far beyond just sort of checking a box. We really think that this is a critical milestone in this overall process, and that's why we really want to talk a lot about the promotion later in this presentation. But the objectives are to firstly provide a project overview reminder for anybody who didn't attend open house number 1, make sure that they're familiar with what the CRP is, why we're doing it. We want to provide a brief overview of the coastal risks and kind of the project rationale, recap what we've heard so far. It's very important for the community to understand kind of where we've been, what we've heard, and reflect that back so that people know we're listening, right? So that people know that we have heard what they've had to say, and it has informed our thinking about our hypotheses, strategies. And then we want to, most importantly, present our resilience strategy framework, kind of the bigger picture of how individual projects or strategies in key areas of the island fit together as part of a holistic island-wide approach. And then through breakout groups, we want to have a sort of focused conversation on focus areas, which Devin will talk a little bit more about, around specific preferred resilience strategies. So some of the key questions are, what does resilience mean? What types of place-based strategies are there? So what are the toolkit options? And then how can these solutions be applied to specific locations across the island, and how would stakeholders prioritize these actions? And then super important is the trade-offs, right? I mean, one of the things that will be really, I think, eye-opening is to look at kind of what different solutions look like in different parts of the island when we talk about, for example, specific elevations for mitigating flood risk. What does that mean as it kind of plays out in physical space? And are stakeholders, is the community willing to or accepting of the kind of trade-offs that might present? And then related to that is, what level of risk are stakeholders willing to accept? So, there are trade-offs associated with different actions, and to not take those actions means that there's a certain level of risk that stakeholders and the community are willing to accept, and we want to better understand what that threshold is. Out of the open house, we'll begin as next steps, refining those preliminary resilience strategies and solutions, begin to identify specific projects and prioritize them, implementation planning, and then continuing to educate the community, generate momentum that comes out of the CRP and really launches the process into kind of the next phase of what I think of very much as kind of a coastal resilience program, right? We have the plan, we have near-term actions and recommendations. What are the immediate next steps? Funding applications, changes to bylaws and ordinances, all of the things that need to begin to happen to really start implementing what is put forth in the plan. So open house number 2, at this stage, I'm going to turn it over to Devin, who's going to talk a little bit about our thinking around the structure and focus and overall kind of format for the open house. And we'll pause after walking through this for kind of group discussion to understand, do we have this right? Does this look like a good way to talk about this, very complicated information with the community?
Next
Devin?
slide. So in open house number 1, we had over 200 people register and 160 people attend. We're hoping that we'll be able to keep those numbers up for the second one, because it's really important that we get everyone's input at this stage so that we can continue refining our solutions so that we land on something that works for everybody and something that people actually want to implement, because that's key. These solutions aren't going to do us any good if they're still sitting in a plan and don't actually end up getting funded or built. So during this open house, we answered a lot of really key questions, like what do you value most about living on Nantucket? What would you want to keep the same in an ideal world? What would you be willing to change? But most importantly, what do you want to see for yourself and future generations? So we're going to continue building on some of the answers that we got in the solutions that we present during the second open house. So if you go to the next slide, Trevor. So the second open house is going to be a virtual meeting again. It'll be 2 hours long. The first piece of it is going to be an introductory presentation, which we're thinking will be about 30 minutes, but that of course can be changed depending on where we land with the breakout groups, which we'll get into a little bit later on in this presentation. But for the overview, we're thinking again to give a little bit of background on the Coastal Resilience Plan, the process so far, and why it's important. We'll do a bit of a recap of coastal risks and the need for the project. We'll repeat some of the things we've heard from the public before, including the goals and priorities that folks on Nantucket have set forth. And then we'll review the resilience strategy framework, which I'll present in just a little bit, and give some guidelines for how folks should be participating in the breakout groups. And then we'll go into breakout groups for about an hour and a half. But again, we'll see how that lands after we talk about what we're thinking for those breakout groups. We can go to the next slide. One of the key things we've developed for this open house, and something that's really going to help us generate successful scenarios that are being presented, is this pre-open house survey. And the idea of the survey is to give us a baseline of how people are feeling about a handful of issues. So there are a number of questions in here that get to what do people think is the responsibility of the town with respect to flood and erosion prevention? Have people invested personally in flood and erosion protection? Do they plan on making those investments moving forward? Trying to get a handle on what types of resources people need in order to feel like they can build resilience on their own, and also kind of get a handle on what types of projects are preferred. So is it a living shoreline? Is it an oyster reef? Is it a seawall? But I think most importantly, we're trying to get a good idea for what type of inconvenience or impact would really indicate a threshold for action. So for example, if your road flooded every time that, every time there was a high tide, would that encourage you as a homeowner to elevate your first floor? or would it happen to have to happen only once a month? So trying to figure out, how much impact is going to force people to act. So that survey hasn't been completely finalized yet, but we do want to get it out as soon as possible. So we can take comments at this point, but we would like to get it kind of out and made public as soon as we can. Ideally, we'll have this link posted within the registration event, right? And then we'll also send it kind of in a follow-up to everyone who RSVPs so that we can get as much participation as possible. Next slide. So this next piece, the resilience strategy framework, I like to think of it as a little bit of how we're going to get there. This is going to be something that helps us understand the resilience strategies that we're proposing and kind of classifies them in a way that makes them approachable and easy to digest. I think you guys have been on this committee for a while. You understand how complicated resilience is and how complicated the solutions are. And sometimes it's a lot to get a hold on. So we're hoping that this framework can make it a little bit easier for stakeholders to interact and help us develop solutions that work. So we can go to the next slide. So as you all know, resilience is more than just risk reduction. It needs to be something that is multi-layered and multi-purpose protection. We need to think about how flood protection might be able to add additional value to our community and improve our quality of life beyond just reducing our risk. We need to be thinking about things at the systems level. How can infrastructure and the places that Nantucketers rely on every day work together to be a part of an overall system that is more resilient over time? We need that system to be able to adapt over time. So solutions that work today might not be the same solutions that work tomorrow, and we need to prepare for that. And while we're doing all of that, we also need to be thinking about equity. So we know that a lot of the members of our community who are maybe least equipped to deal with flood risk are going to be the most affected by it. So we need to make sure that they have the resources they need in order to also be resilient, because they're a critical part of our community. So the Coastal Resilience Plan is really going to use these 4 things to define our roadmap to create a comprehensive resilience strategy for all of Nantucket. And all of that to be said that there are a lot of ways to achieve resilience. And so to show you some of the ways that we think Nantucketers can achieve resilience, we've decided to focus on a handful of focus areas. So Trevor, if you go to the next slide. So although the goal of this project is to develop a comprehensive plan island-wide, we really think that place-based resilience strategies are a great way to kind of stress test some of the things that we think will work. So we've chosen a handful of focus areas across the island. You can see them in the map here on the slide. And these are really areas that are emblematic of conditions that exist island-wide. So, there are strategies that we propose for Madaket that are going to be relevant in other places on the island, and so on and so forth. So we've also picked these to make sure we're capturing all of our critical infrastructure. The ferry obviously is in there, and the airport. But again, nothing is really set in stone at this stage. So if we need to continue adjusting these areas to capture, focus areas that you all think are important, that's something that we can do. Cool. You can go to the next slide. So in addition to the focus areas, we're going to use this kind of framework from no action to retreat to explain some of the things that we're proposing. Like I said earlier, we know there are a range of options and many ways to achieve resilience. But in order to help us move from an individual solution like a living shoreline in one place to a comprehensive strategy for the island that has a living shoreline in Madaket and elevation at the ferry terminal and relocation of the airport, we need to kind of classify those solutions in some way. And so just a couple of examples here on the no action side of things. This is a scenario in which, we don't do anything. We're just living with the risk and we're willing to accept the related disruption that happens. Under the adapt category, also like living with water, This is where you'll find a lot of our kind of soft infrastructure solutions. So living shorelines, targeted marsh management would land here. This can also include some hard structures, such as elevating our roadways or elevating waterfront infrastructure. But it's working under the assumption that the water is going to be present. And so we need to figure out a way to work with it rather than against it. In the next bucket, protect, this is where we're trying to keep the water out kind of at all costs. So you'll see there, building with nature. So this could include any number of walls or berms, flood walls that are double as levees, things like that. And then the last bucket here, retreat. A lot of times we think of retreat as just like a buyout program, but it can be so much more than that. It can be anything from additional setbacks to changing your zoning to reduce density in certain targeted high-risk areas. It can be a gradual application of different policies over time to encourage us to build in areas that are at less risk. And so a retreat is, kind of a broad category. So within each of these categories here, there are a lot of different tools that we can use to implement resilience. And I think that's all I had to say on this slide. So within each of the focus areas, we're going to present one resilience strategy. Each of those strategies can contain different elements from the previous slide, but it'll generally fall within one bucket. So we'll pitch something that is mostly protect for each of those, or for one of the focus areas. We'll pitch something that is a little bit of retreat for one of the focus areas. We'll pitch something that is mostly adapt for one of the focus areas. And I think maybe this might be a terrible analogy, so forgive me if it is, but one way I like to think of this is I don't know what works for me until I try it on, right, when I go shopping. So in this open house, we're going to give you guys an opportunity to try on something. And we're only going to have time really to try on one outfit for each focus area. But hopefully that solution that we pitch, will give us a better idea of which way we need to move on that spectrum on the previous slide. So the idea is that we, have collected all of this information. We have a good idea of how tall you are, what colors you like, if you like jeans or a skirt. And so we'll, pitch this one outfit or this one resilience strategy to see, whether the community likes it or not. And we think it's really important at this point to kind of get into those specifics, recognizing that, this outfit that we're pitching or this one strategy that we're pitching for each of these focus areas doesn't necessarily have to be the final one. It's just an option to give us an idea of how people feel about different elements. So during the breakout, we're going to try and get into a discussion on people's preferences to figure out, again, what is the best strategy for each of those focus areas. Some of the things that we'll talk about are like key themes and priorities for the area. So in Mattakit, it might be ecological restoration and the importance of the marsh. That could be a key theme and a priority there. We'll also try and get an idea of people's risk tolerance. So is it okay if the beach disappears in this place? Or is it, is that not going to work? Is it okay if it floods a foot, but not okay if it floods 3 feet? And we're also going to talk a little bit about trade-offs. So obviously we can't fix everything. And we're certainly not going to have enough money to implement every solution that we want to. So if I buy the scarf, I can't buy the purse. Is that okay? And so we'll walk people through kind of the different trade-offs for different focus areas. And again, these strategies that we're pitching, they're going to be informed by all the information we've collected to date about the vision you all have for Nantucket, the projects that you prefer, what we've heard during the first open house. And it's also going to be informed by the results of that pre-open house survey, which we talked about a couple slides back. So that was a lot of information, but I think if I give you a little bit of an overview of how we want the breakout groups to work, it should become a little bit more clear what we're thinking. You can go to the next slide. All right, so for the breakout groups, we're going to have every stakeholder at the meeting is going to live in one breakout group for the entirety of the second piece of the open house meeting. When we break everyone out into the breakout groups, they'll have an opportunity to choose their breakout group based on their focus area of interest. So if you live in Mattakit, you could pick the Mattakit bucket. If you work at the airport, you could pick the airport and South Shore. If you vacation in Sconset, you could pick Sconset kind of as your focus area of interest. Once everyone is in that breakout group, they'll discuss a potential resilience scenario for 3 different areas. The first one is going to be the one that they elected when they went into the breakout group. The second one will be downtown. We're going to have everyone talk about solutions for downtown. And then the third, time permitting, we'll be able to set up a poll so that everyone in that breakout group can pick a third location that they want to talk about. And we think this setup is kind of a good way to go because people will be able to work on the areas that they're most interested in. And it also allows people to see different strategies for different parts of the island. So the strategy that we're proposing for downtown is going to look very different than a strategy that we're proposing for Sconset or Mattakit. And so by looking at 3 different focus areas, people can kind of see the breadth of different solutions that may be applied, and then maybe start to see how they fit into an island-wide strategy. They can see how, something we're doing Mattakit may work, somewhere else that they're familiar with. One of the risks with this kind of setup is that when people self-select into that area of interest, there might be areas where, not a lot of people pick. Given how broad these are, I don't think that will be the case, but you never really know. So we can't control that. But yeah, I think something else we were planning on is that there may be areas that are more popular, kind of on the flip side of that. And so depending on how we want to do it, we could have more than one breakout group for those areas that are, more discussion worthy, that more people want to talk about. That way we don't have, 100 people in a Mattakit breakout session. We have, 30 in 3 Mattakit breakout sessions. So I think we can go to the next slide. Just a little bit of timing for this. We really want to give folks enough time to digest the resilience strategy that we're pitching for each area, and then also be able to engage in a conversation around the trade-offs for that area and the different things we need to be considering. So we're hoping to do kind of, when people get into the breakout room, we'll do about 5 minutes with introductions, and we'll have a poll to allow people to select that third focus area. And then we'll dedicate about 25 minutes to each focus area. So the one they chose when they entered the breakout room, downtown, and then the one they picked through that polling option. Then we'll have a couple of minutes down at the end to wrap up the conversation. I think this structure can be flexible though. If people are really engaged in the discussion around downtown, we're certainly not going to cut that off. And so if it makes more sense to, for a specific breakout group to only talk about 2 geographic areas because they're having really good conversation, and people are engaged, then that's okay. And I think our moderators can kind of adapt to make that happen. Thanks. So like I said before, for each of these focus areas, we're going to present one potential resilience strategy. And again, this strategy is just going to be one example of what resilience could look like. For the purposes of this preliminary conversation, we're going to focus on actions that can be implemented in the near term. And so we're not thinking about all of those cascading effects, although we will need to think about that at some point. But it really complicates the conversation to say, if we do A, then in 5 years we can do X, Y, or Z, and in 10 years we can do A, B, or C. And so to simplify things and really get the feedback we want, we're going to focus on near-term actions, and we're just going to look at one strategy for each focus area. So generally, each of those strategies is going to fall into one of the categories we talked about, the no action, adapt, protect, and retreat. And like I said, it'll focus on the near-term actions. This strategy is going to be rooted in reality. So we're not going to pitch something that's not going to work for the area. We talked to our engineers, we've talked to our ecologists, and we've come up with strategies that we really think can fit these focus areas and can work for you all. But that being said, what we're pitching is not finalized. And that's a big reason why we want to talk to the public about these options. We want to see if it's a good fit, if that's the right colored shirt, if they want to add a scarf, and so on. So in order to move forward and determine really what is the most appropriate strategy for each focus area, we really need that feedback. We've tried to be strategic in choosing which strategy we present for each area. They have been chosen to kind of illustrate the most prominent themes and trade-offs for that area. So we want to get people talking about the things that are going to influence their decision-making in that place. So like I said earlier in Mattakit, maybe that's a conversation around the eelgrass population, or maybe it's a broader conversation about the salt marsh habitat. And maybe it's ferry service to Jackson Point. We want to kind of solicit feedback about the things that matter for each of these focus areas. So ultimately, we'll end up pitching something kind of like the image shown on the right, to walk stakeholders through what we're thinking for the area and give them a detailed example of our plan. And ultimately, we'll try and elicit feedback on, like I said, their preferences, their thresholds, what they think can fit or won't fit. And when we leave the open house, we'll be able to take that feedback and incorporate it into what we ultimately pitch. And I think that's all I had for this section. So I think we're going to pause for comment, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. Yes, absolutely. I'll turn it back to Mary in a moment. I think, as Devin said, none of this is fully baked at this point. This is our proposal for the open house structure that we would recommend and that we think would work. Obviously, there's a lot of information, and it is complicated to present and facilitate a meaningful conversation around. So we've kind of developed this in a way that we hope enables a focused conversation around kind of our hypothesis strategies, right? And what's shown on this slide is just an example of kind of the visual format that we're thinking of using. We'll be using Google Jamboard again. I think that worked really well for the first open house. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And I think there's a nice consistency to people being familiar with a certain platform and technology. So I think with that, I would open it up to committee questions or comments on what we've discussed here.
Trevor, would you stop the screen sharing so we can see the individuals' pictures?
Yep, absolutely.
And Devin, I like your trying on a clothing outfit analogy. I think that works really well. So good job there. I also like the idea that you're bringing, potential real solutions to people. I think people want to sink their teeth into something and see, what a proposal looks like so they can provide feedback. It is hard for people to conceptualize this. So I think that's a good strategy. I would caution you to make it abundantly clear this is a what if, it's a maybe, it's a proposal, it's not a decision, and that you're looking for people's feedback. People on Nantucket have gotten extremely bent out of joint when they see some concept drawing and assume that that has been approved. So just make it abundantly clear that you're looking for feedback, that this is an illustration, an example, a concept. This is not a proposal. This is not a contract. It is not a done deal. It's just very, very hypothetical. The more that you can stress that both in the graphics that you put up on the screen and verbally, the better the reaction will be. So opening it up to other members of the committee for comments. Yes, Graham.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, seconding everything Mary just said, especially people really appreciate the opportunity to get their hands into something almost, and deal with some potential real solutions. But if you can, as Mary said, just I want to reiterate it at the end, especially because this is like a Zoom meeting, most people are joining in, to have it on the graphics there. So if people are taking screenshots or something, that it will be there. I know that's been an issue in the past because people come and go from these meetings. Thank you.
Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I had a similar comment, especially about people. Because we have 25 minutes for each section within the breakout sessions, I would hate for a conversation to be derailed by who's going to pay for this and that whole, like, we have all been part of meetings like that. So just as Graham said, like on every slide, even having it like as a little like caveat, because I think that's something that's important because to emphasize. The other thing I also was thinking about emphasizing was that there isn't only going to be one solution for each neighborhood, because I think, let's say if you're like that example at the very end with Jackson Point, people, I could foresee a conversation turning into Matticat is more than just that section of Matticat, right? So not that that's not important, but I would, you know, for someone who's fully invested in that neighborhood or lives there, that is attending the meeting, and the whole discussion is about one section that has nothing to do with where they live, I wouldn't want them to be turned off to the process because this is fully conceptual. So that's one thing just to keep in mind, because people do get very, whether it's their home or their business, like get very, you know, it's personal. So they really think about that. One other comment I had was initially I wrote down my comment was how will we rely on the results of the survey? But part of it is obviously we want to get the finger on the pulse of the communities, right? Like what are people willing to work with? But I think we've talked in this group before about, well, we also, this group that has now a certain level of expertise, both already inherently, but also through what we've been discussing for 2 years and learning about from people. I feel like we also want to present to people, this is what we think are the best solutions. And so I am cautious to rely too much on community preference, because it's going to be the 30 to 100 people that attend the meeting. I would hate for that general opinion to weigh too heavily on the solutions that are chosen for our community. Obviously, public opinion is important. We want people to have buy-in into it, especially like we just came through town meeting. We know how important public opinion is, but I really feel like at some point we need the like expertise or some level of advisory group that we are to say, these are the solutions we recommend. And I just wanted to know how that plays into it.
Trevor, if you wanted to respond, to see you have your hand up, and then I have some more comments and Matt might as well.
Yeah, I raised my hand initially because Sarah made good points and it somewhat distracted me from why I originally raised my hand. Oh, I remember. I was just going to make the point that, you know, there's always a tension with these open houses. I think, you know, we had significant attrition after the presentation in the first open house, and some folks just want to tune in and hear what's going on and then drop, right? They don't necessarily want to participate. I think that's fine in general, but we also want to mitigate that to some extent by making very clear upfront in the open house that, you know, this is a collaborative, interactive event, and, you know, the meat of the open house will be the conversations that happen in the breakout. So it's not going to be the sort of thing where you tune in and learn what's happening and you know, expect to have a full experience of the open house. So just to note that we do expect some attrition, but we're going to be working to try to communicate very clearly up front the importance of sticking around for the breakouts. And then to Sarah's point, I think, you know, Devin mentioned that, you know, what we're putting forth as our kind of initial hypotheses, you know, these are real hypotheses. These are not like pie in the sky concepts, right? These are things that we have worked with our, you know, technical advisors on to develop something that's real. So, you know, this is much, to your point, this is much more than a like sort of a public opinion process that gets people's kind of high level ideas about what needs to happen. This is putting forth, you know, potentially implementable solutions as a starting point, right? This is not visioning. That's the basis of the conversation. We collect public feedback, and then we filter that again through another lens of kind of technical assessment and engineering design and our own kind of subject matter expertise to develop then, you know, preferred or recommended solutions for areas in the whole island. So you know, people need to see themselves in what's recommended. They need to understand that it's come through their priorities and goals, but at the end of the day, you know, we need to be putting forth actionable solutions, and so that's why we have the open house now. So we have time on the tail end to take what we learned and actually, you know, bake the cake a little bit more. And we've got all sorts of analogies all over the place, but bake the cake and turn it into something that's edible.
So Trevor, thank you. I have two suggestions to follow up on the comments. The first is, if you want this to be interactive, if you want people to participate, make that abundantly clear in the invitation, on the registration page, in all the materials that promote it. You know, let people know this is interactive. This is their opportunity to help shape the solutions. You know, don't make it sound like a presentation, and give people that expectation coming in that they will be involved and listened to. The second comment is, I did see on the screen that you had a map of the focus areas. I would take those lines off the map. Do not have boxes, because the first thing that came to mind is, how is Fritz, who lives in Cisco, going to feel when his area is not in a box? Is he going to be confused? Well, should he go to the Mattakit or should he go to the South Shore? You know, or is he just not represented at all because he doesn't live in one of those boxes? So I think the names of the focus areas are good, but I would not put boxes on the map. Everybody who lives on Nantucket is going to be able to identify the difference between Sconset and Mattakit. I don't expect that we'll have people unfamiliar with the areas of the island participating in this event. So I don't think those boxes are necessary, and they could be harmful. Other people with comments or questions? Gary or Matt or Fritz? Matt?
Yeah, a couple things. First off, if we're only doing short term this go round, I think how does medium and long get sort of inserted, and when? Like, say everyone in Mattakit says, hey, we want our road raised, for example, but in the medium term, it won't do any good because all the houses are underwater. You know, like, so that's, so when does the medium and long get in? And the other part is, how informed will the discussions be for the trade-offs and the cost? How informed will those things be for this discussion?
Would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, great points, Matt. I think the medium and long, you know, I think what we were just discussing this yesterday, as a matter of fact. It's challenging because we can be much more specific about recommendations for the next 5 to 10 years, right? Real capital projects that can be funded and undertaken, and then we think about the kind of flexible adaptation pathways of how those near-term projects kind of evolve into a longer-term trajectory. So I think as part of the visuals and the sort of facilitation of the conversation, and Devin mentioned about trade-offs, right? Like when we talk about, for example, Mattakit raising a road, and if we have we're talking about an adapt scenario, that means that private property owners are going to be responsible for kind of retrofitting and mitigating risk for their individual properties, right? The town can take care of the public infrastructure, but they can't necessarily retrofit everybody's home. And over the long run, because we're talking about adapt, we're not talking about building walls around Mattakit Harbor to keep the water out. The long run might well be a retreat scenario, right? And we can think about making sure that we've adapted the critical infrastructure, the access points, the roadways, to make sure that people are safe and the system is resilient. But you know, as we continue to monitor sea level rise and understand the pace of sea level rise, we'll begin to think about what a retreat scenario might look like in that area. So it's I think about it kind of as like cascading or sort of different levels of resolution as we move forward in time. We can be we can have a high degree of resolution for things that need to happen in the next 5 to 10 years because we have more certainty about what the risk looks like. And then as we move out in time, we have a little bit less resolution, more fuzzy, but we kind of understand the different forks in the road or pathways that might be taken in different areas. And we can speak to that in the context of the conversation in each of the breakouts.
Matt, with follow-up?
Just a follow-up. So I'll use Mattakit. It could be, as an example, we as a town, I'm on the select board, we're trying to decide, people want, do we need water? Do we need sewer in Mattakit? Do we spend $250 million? Do we spend $250 million plus, another 30, 40 million on raising roads to an area if, let's pretend 15, 20 years from now, it has major erosion and potentially has storm tide pathways and, and daily flooding? Or do we do something else there? I think we have to be at the right level for the various areas. So as long as we're doing that, I'm fine. And I got around to this by thinking about Brant Point. I had always thought, well, we'll block the water, et cetera. Then I learned, the groundwater is going to rise. There's not much we're going to be able to do in the medium to long term there. So, and I look at the amount of roads we're losing, should we, and I think, should we really be counting on vehicles as a community? Should we be counting on adding, 500 vehicles every year when we're going to lose 36 miles of roads? How are people really going to access it? Or should there be another way to access it? I kid around. I don't kid around. I use the gondola as an example. What's our gondola? In Telluride, Colorado, they got rid of a lot of cars because they linked the two towns with a gondola. Are we going to be linking the parts of our island with a gondola or a tram or boats? What is it we're going to do? And if that's where we're going, how do we make sure the steps we take first are not sort of committing us to something that isn't going to work?
Thank you, Matt. And Trevor, I want to follow up on that, and then I'll get to Gary. This is not specific to the event, but it's an idea that Matt just put in my head, and that is, even if you remove the houses in a retreat scenario, there's still some public use of that land. It may still be usable for boating or shell fishing or recreation. And so I think we need, when we're thinking the medium and long term, we think we need to ask, how is the use of that space going to evolve if it's no longer residential or buildings that's there? The island doesn't get wiped off the map just because it's going to flood too frequently to make it habitable. So how does that use evolve? So that's a question, not for this event, but definitely related to the Coastal Resilience Plan. Gary, you had comments.
Yes, I do, Trevor. I don't have a good answer for you, but my question is, we're going to have a small group of people that are going to be participating in this event. And my question is, to what degree are you going to conclude from these folks' participation that this is what the community is willing to do? I'm thinking about the annual town meeting that occurred this weekend. I was so appalled by what I saw, because half of the matters voted on at that meeting were voted on by an audience of less than 150 people in a town where the permanent population of 15,000 and a seasonal population of 40,000. And the newspaper is going to say, this is what the town decided. The town didn't decide anything. 150 stragglers stayed at the meeting and they voted, and suddenly that's the voice of the town. So here we're going to have your meeting. You're going to have 200 people, right? If we're lucky, and they'll be the people most interested. But how do you come to the conclusion? Or is there another way that we're going to figure out that some of the indications you receive during this program are also the same opinions of the larger group of people in those communities? Because you're going to have a small, I don't know how many people from Brant Point might attend, or how many people from some of the other areas might attend. And are you going to conclude that based on those 20 people, that this is the strategy that we should employ, or is there some other way you can verify that, yes, the broader group thinks of that community thinks it's a good idea as well?
Thank you, Gary. I think that's a really important point. I am going to note it's 5 minutes to 11, and Trevor and Devin are not able to stay much longer. So Trevor, was there any final question you wanted to have us address?
Well, there's a few more slides that I can walk through around promotion of the open house, and I want to leave time for discussion of the additional services. But Gary, I would just say, I think unfortunately, we're never going to engage every single person on Nantucket. Although we would love to. We try to make sure that we're sampling the population, for lack of a better word, as much as we possibly can. But nothing is going to be concluded from the open house, right? So it's not that we're going to take what is discussed in the conversation in the open house as kind of like, okay, Nantucket said this is what they want. We now will march forward. This continues to be an iterative process coming out of the open house, and we will come back to the crack with our thoughts, preliminary recommendations and projects and refinements. Crack is a public meeting. Folks from the community will have a chance to stay there. So there will be ongoing engagement afterwards. And then the CRP is a living document, right? So it's not that we're taking the CRP and immediately going to town meeting next year to implement every single thing. This is a document that will evolve over time, and it's going to be responsive to the community's perspectives and interests over time as well. And I just think that's really important to stress that it's a plan. It's not a series of town meeting warrant articles, right? It's a plan that has recommendations that the community will continue to refine and think about and implement in the years ahead. So with that, let me share my screen and just walk through some of the promotional steps that we're going to be taking in the next 2 weeks, and then we can have a brief conversation, or maybe table the conversation, but think about kind of steps that this committee can also take to help promote the open house, as you did during the first open house, which was tremendously helpful, and then a brief conversation about potential uses of the additional options budget. So promotional plan, you all have seen the flyers and provided comments. Thank you very much for that. We've revised those, and we'll be sharing those flyers with you. I think I can send them to Vince, and he can share them with all of you today or tomorrow. And other things we'll be doing, we'll be placing a paid advertisement in the Inquirer and Mirror that will go out next week and the week after. We'll continue to do email blasts, including one tomorrow with the survey link, flyers, a reminder RSVP. We'll be working with the town and some of our partner organizations, Remain, Acclimate, Nantucket Equity Advocates, to undertake social media posts and help promote through their networks, Nantucket Civic Association, and then newsletters, as we did for the first open house, Daybreak, and other kind of island-wide media options. And then certainly look very much forward to having Crack share out as much as possible the flyers, and just making sure that your networks are aware. Gary, for example, Brant Point, your neighbors over there, just as much as you can do, phone calls, share it with the folks that need to be at the table and will have an interest in being there. As has been said on this meeting, you all know the community best, and I think it's very important for you to share with your networks as well. So flyers, share with your friends and family. For those of you that are active on social media, which I know isn't everybody, but if you are, we do have Instagram posts, and we'll share the revised social media toolkit as well with you today or tomorrow through Vince. And again, yeah, I think this is all on effort in the next couple of weeks to make sure we get the word out. I think if folks recall, certainly Mary and Vince do, we saw a significant uptick in RSVPs in like the 3 days preceding the event. And I think with summer and people's level of distraction and busyness during the holiday vacation season, and coming out of quarantine, hopefully, or social distancing, hopefully, it's going to be a bit harder to get people's attention. So we want to make sure that especially the week of, we get this in front of people's faces so that they know to be there. Be there. Social media toolkit. So I think everybody has seen the draft version of this. We have captions for Instagram, Facebook posts, tweets, suggested hashtags, and then Instagram tags. These are just suggestions for those of you who do work on social media. Please feel free to make the post your own. The more personal you can make it, the better. And then I'm sorry for rushing through that, but I did want to get to this because I think this is very important. We are at kind of a threshold now where we can begin to think about the additional budget that's been allocated for additional study or other kind of deliverables through the CRP. So we have a couple of different suggestions here, and they fall into 3 buckets. The first is additional community engagement products. I did listen to the last CRAC meeting where the mid-project report and just kind of mid-project performance was discussed, and certainly heard loud and clear the desire for engagement and more robust engagement across the island. And so certainly want to deliver on that and work with you all to figure out the best strategies, which we can undertake, under the existing budget and scope of work. But there are some other suggestions here that were discussed that we could add on as kind of additional engagement tactics. A video short is one. I think there was, Vince had mentioned that there was a discussion around producing some sort of video. Videos are quite time intensive and costly to produce. And I think we need to think carefully if that's the best use of the budget. But certainly something that is potentially doable. Another idea would be to support a series of CRP launch events that after the CRP is produced, perhaps in-person events on the island could be supported through that budget. Then on the more technical or implementation side, additional kind of focused area and technical studies. So we'll be producing concept designs for physical solutions for priority projects, but that's the beginning of a longer design process. We can continue to advance that design process for certain projects using the budget. We can think about focused study for identified high-risk areas, thinking about Washington Street, Easy Street, places that are really tricky and that require additional kind of focused study and effort. And then there's detailed risk evaluation for critical infrastructure, including, if necessary, site survey. So if there is particular type of infrastructure, for example, Steamboat Wharf or maybe town-owned infrastructure that really we need to better understand if it's at risk and what that means, we could allocate the budget there. And then finally, and I think, honestly, if you were asking my opinion, I would move in this direction, which would be preparation of federal and state grant applications for priority projects. You can get a lot of bang for your buck by putting together a grant application that gets the town $10 million, for example, from the BRIC program, and something that we have a lot of experience doing, and look forward to doing, even if not under the auspices of this project, but hopefully assisting the town with in the future. But as we develop the CRP and start to identify specific projects that are eligible for funding under these programs, assisting with a grant application is something we can certainly support. And then finally, detailed development of local bylaw and regulation changes. Through the CRP, we'll be recommending changes to local bylaws and regulations. With suggested language and suggested reforms. We can take that to the next level of detail and actually kind of scope out and provide the full kind of scope of what those changes would look like, so that they're ready to take through town meeting and implement. But open to other ideas as well. I can stick on for a few more minutes for this discussion. This is actually the last slide. So Mary, would you like me to leave this up so people can see it, or should I stop share?
I think stopping the sharing would be helpful.
Okay.
All right, comments or questions, Matt, and then Sarah.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the last. What are the short-term bylaw changes that we need to make? I think something, if we could, I think that would be, in my mind, that's the most important thing. And then if we have that along with going out to the community when we roll this out, you know, saying, hey, these are the first things we should do. What I'm sort of saying to everybody is to retreat, you have to stop going forward first. So what are our bylaw changes to stop going forward? You know, to stop things from getting worse. You know, that would be what I would like to see.
Thank you, Matt. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, similar to Matt, I was thinking if we're thinking about like a limited amount of money and what are the next steps or where we want to put that, I would say whatever the most technical expertise is. So both that middle section where you were talking about some of the technical recommendations for some of the like projects that we're looking at to implement in a more short term, and as well as just to echo what Matt said about the bylaws. I think while the other ideas are great, I think if we are thinking about the best use of you guys as a consultant and where your expertise is that we don't have, I think that's where I would advocate for.
Yeah, I would agree that leverage is a key evaluation criteria. Getting the most for the investment. Vince, did you have a comment or?
Just to say that I put it in the chat. Trevor mentioned that I sent the something along about a video idea. That's actually Mary's idea, not mine. I can't take credit for it. And Mary had found an interesting video, the ant and the, oh, I can't remember the name of it now, Mary.
I was going to bring that up under new business, so okay. We'll get to that later.
So it's still a potential idea, but that might be something that might be done separately from this. Potentially, I don't know.
Other thoughts or comments for Trevor and Devin before they have to sign off? Holly?
I just wanted to mention thank you for including obviously the BRIC and MVP and CZM grant funding. I'm always obviously mentioning that we're just getting off our MVP action grant that we got in 2019, ending in June at the end of this month. Obviously, we've received CZM grants for other things before, and obviously knowing how the BRIC program has evolved over this past year and all the ins and outs of that. So I'm actually glad to hear that you all will be promoting that. I think that's a good thing. The more I think bang for our buck, so to speak, is something that comes from grants. And I always hear that in the back of my head. Town admin wants to know how are things being paid for. And I know Matt could probably pipe in on this as well. As a taxpayer, we want to make sure that we're being able to utilize that. And there's a lot to learn from the BRIC program, from what I've been involved with. So I would like, as a planner, would like to see how the CRP can actually give us those attainable projects to say, okay, this is something we can definitely do and move forward. Because I think it's there's so many different avenues that we can go. So thank you for including that in there. And sorry I'm late, guys.
And I'd add that any decision about focusing on advancing the technical analysis or the engineering for a particular area would probably be best made after the open house, when you have people giving you feedback on particular areas and particular plans. I don't know if you need decisions before then, but definitely that the input from that would be helpful in that kind of decision making. Anything else? Members of the public as well, those are in attendance. If you have a comment right now, this is a good time. We will also offer that opportunity later for more general comments. Seeing none, Trevor, if you have any final remarks?
No, just thank you very much. I think excellent conversation. We'll follow up through Vince via email with the promotional materials, and look forward to seeing you all on the 24th, if not before. So thanks again to everybody for hosting us today.
Thank you, Trevor. And did you have anything specific that you wanted feedback on prior to the open house, or are you good to go?
The only thing I would mention is that the survey, while we do want to launch that, we can still make changes to that. So when you see the survey that goes out, please feel free to let Vince know if you have suggested, changes to the wording or questions. We can always update a question. But the first this survey is kind of, it's not the final survey. We'll be launching another survey after the open house, similar to the first open house, where we'll ask similar questions. So I think Sarah looks like she's raising her hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Sorry, just really quick. Will there be a chance for the committee to see some of the project recommendations for each neighborhood before the 24th? Just, I don't know. I kind of feel like people are looking to us because they know that we're on the committee, and not like we know everything that you guys know, but just might be nice to see some of those proposals a little bit beforehand.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the calendar here. Do you have another meeting?
We
You have a meeting on the
meet-
22nd?
Right.
Yeah, we're still in the mode of producing the visuals, but I think we can certainly share the draft visuals that will be in the breakouts, with the committee, just so you have a chance to kind of go through those before the open house. It may be the week of, if I'm being quite honest. But we can certainly make sure that the committee has access to those prior to the open house.
And just a reminder, Trevor, if you would send your presentation slides from today to Vince for our archives.
Absolutely, will do.
I think that would be helpful too for those of us that are interested in giving you feedback on the open house to have the initial slides.
Absolutely.
Okay, we can move on to the next agenda item, and thank you once again, Trevor and Devin, for being
all.
here. We'll see you on the 24th, if not before. So next up on the agenda, we did have continued discussion and review of the Coastal Resilience Plan efforts and the work undertaken to date. We began talking about this at our last meeting. I wanted to come back to it. I took the opportunity to review the stakeholder engagement plan that is posted on the town's website and is available. Vince, I don't know if you have that ready to pop up. So for instance, one of the things that's in the engagement plan is surveys, and until an hour ago, I hadn't seen a lot of activity in surveys, and so I'm very happy that Arcadis is coming back with additional surveys for the public. But I wanted to just scroll down some of these roles and responsibilities. So Vince, if you want to scroll through, we have the consultant team, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, obviously Town of Nantucket staff. There's an implementation and regulation focus group that we haven't heard anything about yet, but that would appear to be something that would come towards the end of the process, so we can circle back with Trevor on that. Vince, if you want to keep going. Oops, that's not, I think that passed an extra page. It's not what I was expecting. Oh, hang on, let me look at my copy because I was thinking of something else.
This is the version that's on the town website, Mary, the one that we got.
Yeah, okay, no, I was just thinking of something else.
Okay.
All right, so in the short version of it, though, there are, I believe, goals in the stakeholder engagement plan that have not been met yet, and efforts that were promised both by the consultants and expected from the committee that we could do more. So I would encourage all of the committee members to review this and figure out, what do we want to ask Arcadis about to make sure that it is included in the remaining couple of months before the Coastal Resilience Plan is delivered. Let's see if I can find the page that I was looking for so I can redirect. So page 5, Vince, apologize, I gave you the wrong page to start with. So this is major community groups and stakeholders. So local and state elected officials, town departments, town boards, and so on. We know that Arcadis has met with many of the town's representatives. If you want to keep scrolling down, Vince. Yeah, to the next page. So Nantucket residents, Nantucket youth and students, Nantucket workers, Nantucket business owners, Nantucket visitors. Those are groups that we haven't targeted in that sense. We've had some public engagement, but I wonder if there are things that we should be doing to have a targeted outreach to these particular groups that are listed as community engagement participants. So any ideas on how to reach the groups that are listed here would probably be useful to Arcadis? Or is it something that we feel is covered sufficiently in the general public outreach that's been done so far and will be done in the future? Those are just questions for the committee to think about. The mid-project report did report on community engagement. I don't recall that we had a lot of metrics, and that's something I would want to see in the future. So things like, how many people attended the event, how many people have been reached through the email that's provided, how many people are using the app, how many people, if we know, fall into one of these various categories. So I think reporting on more metrics would be useful to help us figure out what kinds of outreach would be most effective. And I'll just remind everybody that when we created the mission statement for this committee, we made a point of wanting to be involved in the process and provide oversight. And we need to live up to that commitment. So again, your thoughts on how much more we can do and how we can assist the public in finding out about this process and participating in it. We have a responsibility there. So there's some of the points that I wanted to bring up. Happy to hear comments or conversation from other members about what we can do. And I'm happy to note that Arcadis also asked us for our participation. Graham, comments?
Thanks, Mary. One of my concerns is we really haven't, I haven't seen us be very successful at the island-wide engagement, getting our diverse community involved, and certainly that's a challenge that I haven't seen many be successful with on Nantucket in general, but I would like to see us strive to do a bit better with that. And maybe Florencia, one of the school translators, would be willing to translate to Spanish, and we could have a Spanish speaking session. I know I've done some presentations that way, and there's a lot more that could be done. But if there's some way that we can try to reach some of those other demographics, communities within our larger community.
Yes, Vince, I think you have some comments on that, and I'll follow up if I have anything to add.
Thank you, Mary. So the engagement has been a bone of contention the whole way through, and there's no denying that. For this round, we're trying to get as much engagement as we can again. So whichever, I think Trevor's going to send me the final outreach information today. Sorry, there's drilling going on. I apologize for that. That's going to get translated into Spanish as well. Just like in January, there's also going to be a Spanish version of the breakout rooms available if anyone wishes to avail of that. Trevor didn't mention it today, but it is on the cards. It is a plan. And engagement is a headache. There's no getting away from that. If you can only get 150 people to stay on a town meeting, how can we hope to do better when town meeting is as big as it is? So it's not just a problem for the CRP, but let's strive to see if we can't outdo what we did before in January at least.
So I want to add, Vince, if we don't tell people that a Spanish translator is available, then nobody who speaks Spanish will show up to use that service. So that's a note we should send back to Trevor right away. Every invitation for this open house should have a note on it that there's availability in Spanish, or should direct them to information in Spanish that will tell them about how to participate. I don't think anybody knew in January that there was a Spanish translator available for that event. And so it wasn't used. Sarah, comments?
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't have expertise in this area myself, but I think we can use what was like all the COVID messaging our island did as a really good model, where there were like either dual things happening at the same time, or there was like, if it was a short message, there was a short message in English and a short message in Spanish. I know we have many more languages than Spanish, but I think that's the primary demographic and probably time-wise what we can do. So I think especially like the sharing on social media, I've seen both. The school does it. Every single parent newsletter I get has both English and Spanish directly on it, like every single email. And I think that's something that we could do for all these announcements. It shouldn't be that much more if we have I'm assuming we have a town translator that
Well, Arcadis has provided Spanish translation,
okay.
so they should be able to provide a
Yeah.
translated text. The other thing I want to just exhort committee members is when you see a post on social media, don't just go, oh, great, somebody posted it. Like it, share it, particularly share it in a group that's appropriate for the subject matter. The way that Facebook works is that posts in groups are delivered to all the group members, but posts on pages or on individual timelines, it's by chance. If somebody sees them, they're not prioritized. So definitely, help with the sharing. That would be wonderful. Sarah?
Also, I was going to email this later because I don't know if it's appropriate on the full meeting, but because I write for Yesterday's Island, and I was already planning on my next article being about coastal resiliency in general and the plan, because it'll come out before the open house. So I was already planning on doing that, and that obviously only it's island wide, but it's free, and so it does reach a lot of the visitor community as well. So that's one on that demographic list that might be helpful. And I was going to email you separately, but since we're talking about the engagement specifically, if there's certain specific things you want me to mention, just let me know and I will put that in. I'll be writing it by the weekend. So it comes out next Wednesday. Like this one will come out next Wednesday.
Thank you, Sarah. Other thoughts on public engagement on our remaining timeline until the Coastal Resilience Plan is delivered, on our committee member responsibilities, or publicity and outreach for the open house? Okay, seeing none. Let's see. Vince, there's one thing that I want to call out, not as anybody's fault, just an oversight. There is no link on the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's webpage on the town website to the Coastal Resilience Plan. So there's no direct path to go there. If we can add that, I think that would be a nice step. Thank you, Vince. All right, so our next topic on, Gary, I'm sorry, did you have a comment?
Just a thought about what you were asking. When you think about it, we're into June already and they're supposed to come out with their plan in September. And to the extent that there might be some specific actions recommended, there's not a lot of time for those plans to be developed, discussed, circulated, and debated. So I'm just worried about the time between today and September when the plan comes out. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to come up with anything really concrete that has been vetted as appropriately as it should be, just because things take time and the pandemic hasn't helped us getting some of this stuff moving along. If we didn't have the pandemic, there probably would have been a lot more of community, personal-based meetings where people would have heard stuff. Because of the pandemic, people were distracted, and we just have a short window, and September's going to be here before we know it. And we'll have to see what comes out of that and how concrete those suggestions will be. I have a devious thought, but I'm not going to recommend it at all. When I watch the news programs, especially on NBC, it always bothers me. The preview of the news is a comment by the person who's providing the news about all the terrible things that could happen, and so they're trying to get the public concerned enough so that they'll actually stay and listen. So the only way we could emulate that, and I don't suggest we do that, is to say, come to these meetings because you'll have to come to see which of our properties will be taken away by the town under eminent domain. Are you going to lose your property? That way we'll get attention. Otherwise, people are not so concerned about how it affects them. I have a good answer for that.
I'm glad you're not promoting that as a strategy.
I'm not.
Gary. Point taken, though. Vince, I think that.
Quick, Mary, real quick.
Go ahead.
It's not wrong. When I was fundraising for the Delta fields, we would raise 150,000. It would slow down, and we'd put a thing in the Inky saying that the fields aren't going to get built, and then another 100,000 would come in, and then another 100,000. We had to do it 3 or 4 times but people need to feel like it's gonna impact them, that, oh, this project we really need isn't gonna happen. So it's sort of human nature. Anyway.
Thank you, Matt. Vince, I was going to ask if there's time available at our next meeting, could Trevor give us sort of a, set expectations about what happens publicly in July and August and in September before the plan comes out, and then what happens in September and October after the plan is released? I was a little surprised today to hear him saying that Arcadis could be available after delivery of the plan to work on something, like public
Right.
events or other things. So that was just a surprise to me. It wasn't my expectation that they would continue to be available and involved. So maybe we can get a little more clarification on that sort of availability before and after the plan.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, super quick. So I was curious about that too. And as many years in working as a consultant myself, it always behoves my interest as a consultant to make sure that I can follow up on plans and try and see about the next contract. But it is also something that we would like on the town's behalf to have some engagement with Arcadis post-delivery so that we can continue to understand parts of the plan, deliver parts of the plan, get funding for projects, most importantly. And that's kind of one of the things that was brought up today, and that is something that I would particularly like, particularly with BRIC programs coming from the federal government and MVP projects that could come out from this plan as time goes on. I'd love to have Arcadis involved in the longer term under some kind of retainer. I have no idea how that would work, but that's just a guess at this particular moment.
Great. Fritz.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, what people have already said, but I think it's, I don't know how we do it, but it's really important that somehow we get people on board to understand what this process is and get people's opinions, or at least understanding of what's happening this summer, because I think Gary mentioned it meeting or two ago, you're going to have a huge summer population here for a short period of time. And they're important to this process because they own a lot of the property and they own most of the tax base that's going to pay for all of this. And so I don't know how we do it. I was jokingly going to say, and I'll say like Gary, I'm going to say it, but I'm not going to propose it. But it's sort of like maybe an annual meeting. What we need to do is sort of what they've been doing for COVID, which is sort of like give away a free truck at the last moment of the meeting for anybody who can prove that they sat through the entire meeting. Just one, but kind of like a raffle, not a raffle, but it's like a lottery ticket for something. I don't know. Maybe we need to find some incentive to get people to actually come to these meetings or somehow do it. And, it would be great if you could have a tent and you could have, the same kind of, here's this, whole public meeting dealing with the issue, or at least a presentation. But I don't know how you get people to come to it, because you're absolutely right. If you can't get people to come to town meeting or vote on these issues, I don't know how you get them to listen to something like this. And it's a shame, but I don't know how you do it. But,
Thank you, Fritz. Any more wild and crazy ideas we want to float since we're on that subject? Okay, if there's no further discussion, we can move on to the next agenda item. And so this is an item, updates on other related and concurrent coastal resilience projects, if available. So what I've done here is sort of combined our event announcements and just a list of the projects that are ongoing. I don't expect that every project will have an update every time we meet, but I just wanted to have a perennial item on the agenda in case there was news that came out in the interim. So Vince, if you have anything on the first two items.
I do on Baxter Road, Mary, not Sheep Pond Road today. So I'm starting the process of organizing the second group meetings. We have selected dates. It looks like June 22nd is going to be the date for the SBPF and that cohort. And that's going to probably be from 4 to 6 p.m. June 23rd, the following day, we're going to look at Coastal Conservancy and Land Council and that grouping for their second round meeting. I'm also trying to work out a time for the third group, which is Select Board, CRAC, and Keytown staff. So I've gotten okay for a date on from Town Admin. I'm checking with Select Board to make sure that works. I haven't had a quorum of responses yet, so I can't make sure that I can offer that to CRAC yet, but tentatively, please block off your calendars for June 29th from 3:30 to 5:30. That's June 29th from 3:30 to 5:30. This will be followed up with a proper email once I can confirm that date.
And so that is a Tuesday.
Yes, Tuesday, June 29th. It's not a CRAC meeting date.
Right.
It's the 5th Tuesday of the month, as far as I remember.
Yep. Great, thank you, Vince. Jen Carberg is not attending today, so we do not have an update on the plan that's being developed by the Conservation Foundation and the trustees of reservations. We do not have a land bank representative. I will say that Vince and I met with Rachel Freeman from the land bank, and they've got some interesting stuff going on. And Rachel did say she'll come back to us with an update on what they're doing with the Woods Hole group. So we'll be looking forward to that. Resilient Nantucket Designs for Adaptation. I did put the announcement here. Holly, I don't know if you wanted to add anything
Sure.
about that.
Absolutely, thank you. So as you all are aware, Resilient Nantucket, which is our MVP action grant, it ends with the state at the end of the month. So we're at the final stages, if you will. And recently I presented to the select board on the toolkit. Thank you to you all for your input in that toolkit that is available on the town's website. Please take a look at it if you haven't yet. I think it's going to be a great resource for everybody moving forward for resiliency in general. Also on this Friday, the HDC is going to have a regular meeting. In the beginning of the meeting, we're going to have our consultant for the design guidelines basically do a final presentation and wrap up, if you will, of the design guidelines, ask if there's any questions from the public as well as the commissioners. And I'm hopeful for a formal adoption from the commission because these guidelines are what we're going to be using moving forward. We've been using them on a case-by-case basis, obviously, establishing a process, establishing a checklist, if you will, for people knowing what they need to do for elevation and their flood-proof and wet-proof mechanisms for structures. So I think we're doing good, and I've been stressing to both the Historical Commission and the HDC that these design guidelines are the individual site-specific based on the National Park Service's standards, which is we're very fortunate to be in this position to be able to utilize this guidance from the National Park Service that came out a couple years ago. And that the Coastal Resiliency Plan is really going to be the area wide, and that it's very, very important while they're looking at those individual historic structures and historic areas that they're engaged and involved in the Coastal Resiliency Plan. So I have been promoting it as much as I possibly can. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the update. And then finally, the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge, where there was an announcement included in the agenda. They will have their exhibition opening in the Thomas Macy Warehouse at some point in June, up through, I think, the end of the year. And so we're looking forward to that. I was able to watch the public presentation online, and I think Vince was able to attend most of it. Really good. I hope that the recording is available so that people who weren't able to see it can see it. There's some great remarks and some interesting things from the students. I haven't been able to look at the projects in detail, but definitely worth checking out if you have the time. All right, public comments. Is there anyone from the public who has a comment for the committee at this time? And you can just unmute yourself and let me know that you want to speak if you do have a comment. If not, then we will move on to the approval of the minutes. The agenda says May 22nd. It was actually the meeting on May 25th. Nowhere is there. We did have a couple of edits. Vince, if you want to pop that up and we'll run through them.
Thank you, Mary. Do you mind if I just take it super quickly?
Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to delete a sentence at the top. Jen Carberg was only missing for a few seconds, not a few minutes. There was no real loss from her. I have added the link into for the previous meeting. I've added in the fact that it's Nantucket Conservation Foundation and the trustees that are working on the project for Co2 and Great Point. It's a joint venture between them. Just a very minor correction for the June 22nd event and the June 21st event. June 22nd was at Great Harvey Yacht Club, not Macy's. The June 21st event is at Macy's Warehouse. Minor correction, and just corrected a typo, turning the word setback into 2 words. Other than that, does anyone have any other corrections that I have missed, or that Mary or I have missed?
All right, seeing no comments, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Fritz. So roll call vote. Gary Beller.
I wasn't there, so I'll abstain.
Thank you, Gary. Sarah Boyce.
Approved.
Graham Durovich.
I wasn't there, I'll abstain.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Chris McClure.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. So I think that's 3 positive, 2 abstentions, and I forget where we are, but it passes. Next item on the agenda, committee reports. Are there any members who have reports from their representative organizations? And then I have an announcement to go along with that if there's nothing else. Matt?
Just a comment. I spoke last meeting, the meeting before, about putting a some sort of art downtown with a white line on one of the buildings or a couple of the historic buildings, just as an educational. Since then, I spoke to Cecil at Remain, and they've been discussing the same thing. They have somebody in one of their consultants knows someone in Miami that may be able to help us do it. They were thinking of doing it in the fall, but might be willing to do it quicker. And she and I are gonna speak, but I've been too busy to do that. So that's an update.
Thank you, Matt. So as I noted in the agenda, I was able to write an article for the Chamber of Commerce Guidebook, which has come out recently. And also Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge has an article in the guidebook. So that guidebook goes out to, I think, thousands of people through the year, and those articles will be available to them. Not something we can use to promote the open house, but I did include links back to the town's website for more information. In addition, sort of following up on Matt's comment, at our last meeting, we were throwing ideas around. I have reached out to the Dreamland, and they are receptive to partnering with us on showing a film. I happened to stumble across a film that deals with climate change, and they're considering it for their Film for Thought series, and would be open to having a discussion follow the film where we would talk about the local coastal resilience efforts. That is all very preliminary at this point. It is not something to announce. And the film is one that's come out recently. It's not available for viewing online. So it's something that they would have to procure. So hopefully that's all able to be worked out and scheduled for sometime this summer. I've also reached out to the Historical Association about the idea of some kind of public visualization of sea level rise at the corner of the Whaling Museum complex. That, again, they are receptive. We need to figure out what and where and how it would work. So again, very preliminary, but I wanted to follow up and let the committee know that we are pursuing some of those ideas from the last meeting. Does anybody have other follow-ups or other comments on those? Gary?
Yeah, just in thinking about maybe more of what I said before, that some of the enormous decisions that need to be considered relate to our protection of our downtown. And I'm not sure who the decision makers are. Who are the stakeholders? Is it the town? Is it I mean, I don't know who makes those decisions, but that's very important to the whole idea of how the island deals with rising tides and climate change. And with such a short window between now and the end of when the report is, how are we going to even deal? Who's going to be dealing with the issue of should we armor the harbor? What about those plans that some communities have thought about? Even Boston has put in some kind of walls. That article you sent around the other day. Who are the decision makers? Who are the stakeholders that are going to be providing the input on those important decisions?
Good questions, Gary. I will note in that vein, the town meeting did pass the appropriation for the Brant Point pump station, but I think that needs to be further passed at town elections. So, that keep letting people know that it's an important issue, that we need to fund it. In that sense, the people are the voters who are making the decision about providing the funds. So whatever you can do to influence them in that respect.
Yeah, well, that's just a small piece. I think about Easy Street, and I think about the ferries coming in there. And, is there any thought, any group that's going to say, let's think about armoring the harbor, closing it the way they do in some towns, in some over in Europe and maybe here in the United States. I don't know which organization or which group, which community feels that it's something that they are going to be responsible for providing thought leadership on. And,
Matt?
Well, Gary, that's us. We've seen the enemy, and it's us. We have to do that, and we have to provide that leadership and provide sort of those recommendations, and hopefully town meeting will follow it. There's been a lot going on in Oak Bluffs about sort of the traffic and the new building for the steamship and the vineyard, all that stuff. So I asked about, well, geez, what have they done over at Oak Bluffs? Have they thought about sea level rise? Because when you look at the maps, some of the roads are all complaining about having too much traffic are right next to wetlands, and they're all going to be underwater. And we're, the building's going to be raised for the steamship. And I said, well, yeah, but what are the cars going to be parked in 2 feet of water waiting to go into the building? And so it's not just us that haven't really thought this through. And I'm not being critical of the steamship or the town or anybody, but this has to get into sort of the culture of the decision making. And I don't think it's there yet. When I talk about Matticat, saying, are we going to spend, $250 million to put water and sewer to Matticat to have it washed away in 30 years, that would be insanity. So, so we have to start the conversations so the right choices are made.
And I think that's exactly correct, Matt. I mean, we can't look to some hypothetical entity to provide the answers. It is us, and it is our role as a committee to assist with that public engagement, to make sure that people begin talking about this and begin expressing their opinions, so that the people who make decisions, whether it's the select board or the Steamship Authority board, are aware of the public's concerns. Holly, and then Vince.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, and I would be remiss as a planner if I didn't say this, listen to what Trevor had mentioned. The CRP, the plan itself, is a living document. So it's going to be evolving. We're going to have all these ideas in there, and hopefully a roadmap to what we're going to achieve and how we're going to fund that, those plans. But it's going to be always evolving. Every single planning document that the town has, from the master plan to the HMP to this future CRP, is a living document. So they're always being added on to revise, whatnot, in its own little microcosm. And then once you finally formally revise it, you can add to it. So just bear that in mind, that, you know, it may have something in there that we as a town decide, you know what, maybe we don't want to do this, or maybe that's the worst case scenario. But again, it's not going to be gospel. It's going to be evolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Vince, anything to add?
Only just a couple of extremely minor points. Matt and Holly covered it. Whatever is in the plan, obviously the engineers at Arcadis are going to vet it to make sure that it would at least stand a chance of getting through the planning process. It will then have to go through the planning process, go through our planning department, go to Mass DEP, go through whatever else it needs to do, HDC if it's applicable, just to get approval. So our engineers at Arcadis are going to work to make sure that that is at least highly possible. Then don't forget this CRP that we're working on. It's going to be the first CRP for Nantucket, but it's not going to be the only one. Holly covered this. We're going to have another go at this in 10 years to update, correct, and take what we learned in this first 10 years. So I don't know that we're going to get the massive project to close the harbour in this version, but there's going to be things in it that are going to be large scale. And there's probably going to be things in the next version in 10 years time that'll be even larger scale. I think that kind of gets to Gary's point a little bit. I don't know if I entirely answered your question, Gary, but hopefully that'll give you some respite to think that, you know, it's at least still possible, even if it's not in this first plan.
I go back to one of the comments that I heard from one of the presenters at a recent event, and I apologize, the name of the event and the name of the presenter escaped me at the moment, but he said the water's not going to rise 10 feet next year. We do have time to plan and to better understand what the options are. What we don't have time is to not plan. You know, we have to start planning now for what will happen in the future, but know that those plans will change as we get more information, as conditions change. But we have to start now. We're not going to finish now, but we have to start now. Any other comments under committee reports? Fritz?
Well, it's not really committee reports, but it's commenting on the comments that were just made. So in thinking that, you know, the present version of the CRP is going to be, say, looking forward 10 years. Never, should we as a committee be trying to determine what decisions or what items should be in that first 10 years as opposed to the second 10 years or the third 10 years, or is somebody else doing that for us? I'm not sure of what I'm hearing, that it's necessarily that Arcadis is necessarily doing it in that manner. And so I guess, should we be focusing to make sure the public understands, or to be able to communicate to the public, what decisions need to be made in the next 10 years, given what's likely to happen? Second, then, should we then be directly engaged? In other words, we're having stakeholder meetings with consultants and events and whatever, but should we be specifically trying to get representatives, whether it's for the first 10 years or the second 10 years, but at least starting to develop subgroups? So for instance, take the town. Should we be now saying, going to the Steamship Authority? Should we be going to the major landowners downtown? I mean, that group owns a tremendous amount of property downtown. Should we be going, I mean, I don't know whether it's Nantucket Electric then, or the electric, not, or grid, I'm sorry. But certainly the Steamship Authority, the major stakeholders in downtown. And should we be specifically saying, we want to talk about this and we want you to designate somebody to meet with us periodically, just so that we know that the discussion is starting to move forward, as opposed to saying, oh yeah, we've talked to the Steamship Authority and they're thinking about that. Well, but we don't know what they're thinking about that, and we don't know whether they're going to continue to think about that or what they're thinking about that. So I guess it's a question of, it's not like a subcommittee, but it's You know, how do we directly engage them to make sure that those discussions are going forward in a specific sense, in a specific way, rather than in just a general way?
So I'll answer that, and then I see Sarah has a hand up and maybe Matt to follow. In the case of the Steamship Authority, I have actually attended most of their board meetings for the last year. And I have been a bit of a gadfly asking them for a long-range planning group for Nantucket. They have recently created one for the Vineyard and for Woods Hole. So the Nantucket Hyannis route, I think, would benefit from one as well. And I will continue to advocate for that. Steamship is, you know, they've had a tough year too. So asking them to take on more right now is, you know, I haven't been, you know, aggressive about that, but I will continue to follow up with them. But that's just an example of what I have done. And I would encourage every committee member to look for those opportunities to bring coastal resilience into the conversation with every stakeholder that exists. It's not something that's separate. It's something that has to be part of our conversation, which is essentially the resolution we presented to the select board. You know, every project needs to be thinking about this. And to put it another way, every organization needs to be thinking about this. But that's really up to us to help make happen, us as individuals, even more than us as a committee. Sarah, you have comments?
Yeah, I mean, when you first started speaking, Fritz, I was thinking about that was kind of like what I was trying to get at with asking Trevor for some of the idea of some of the plans beforehand, right? So like as a committee, we should try sort of know, or I feel like sort of know what's about to come out from the planning process, because we're going to be on that open house, right? And so I feel like either representing it or kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just me, I like to know what's coming. Like, what are they going to say that sort of, because we're connected with that, right? People see that as our committee and the plan. But the flip side of that, Fritz, or the other side of what you were saying about the example of the steamship was, I was kind of thinking for those organizations or businesses or kind of bigger entities that aren't fully engaged in the process now, like maybe they're not sending representatives to these meetings, or maybe they've only kind of been like, yeah, I'll like meet with you once, but we're one and done. Once we have the plan and they might see something as more directly impacting them, I feel like that's maybe where our future is to talk about the implementation aspect. So I'm assuming that some of the things that are going to come out in the plan are different range plans for like the steamship. We keep picking on the steamship, but it's a vital infrastructure. And so it's once we have this plan that says, we might have to move the terminal, or we have to, you know, and then we have something to show them, that's when I feel like we might have more engagement. But, and maybe that implementation is where the neighborhoods or those regions take subcommittee groups or something like along those lines. I'm not exactly sure, but that's for the, like, we're trying to get everybody engaged right now, right? But for those who are just not doing it now, they're hearing it over and over again. And it's when we have an approved plan and with different projects to potentially move forward, or at least areas cited as highly vulnerable, then I think that's when we kind of can move forward with some of that.
That's a good point, Sarah. Matt, comments?
Yeah, and we're going to have this out in time to have all of this included in the master plan update. So I'm hoping, Fritz, this is a hint, that this is, you know, front and center of your, you know, of your group when we do it. It's going to impact transportation on island. It's going to impact what the zoning should be in different districts on island. There's a lot of issues that even in the short to medium term are going to come out of this thing that I think are appropriate to be dealt with at that level.
I agree.
Thank you, Matt. Any further comments before we move on? All right, seeing none. Next item on the agenda is our meeting schedule. I just want to take the temperature of the group. Do we have a preference for continuing to meet via Zoom or this summer going to meeting in person, assuming that we have a choice? That's not something we can take for granted, but I just wondered, you know, how the group felt for meeting in person versus meeting via Zoom for the summer. Any comments? Gary?
I'd prefer to meet in person.
In person? Okay, Sarah?
Sorry, I was gonna say I prefer to meet via Zoom if it's a choice. Just the traffic going to that area and the amount of additional time it takes to travel there, but I will obviously am committed either way.
Matt, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine either way. I'm vaccinated. I'm fine to sit with you guys.
Fritz, do you have any comment?
No, I'm happy to do it either way. I'm here and I'm available.
Okay, so just noting that there's not a strong preference for one or the other. Most of us are okay. And traffic is always a concern. Vince?
Only a minor point, mostly for you and me, Mary. Juneteenth is a new holiday for the town. It's going to be June 18th this year because the posting will have to be done a little bit earlier. So it's kind of a point more for you and me because of the June 22nd meeting.
Thank you. I had not put that together yet. Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't thinking correctly. When I said my preference, it wasn't because of COVID. It was more for logistics and schedule. COVID wise, I'm fully fine to meet in person.
Okay. Yeah, I again, for personal reasons, have enjoyed meeting via Zoom, but I'm happy to meet in person again. That would also be nice. And I wouldn't have to read the announcement, so. Fritz, comment?
I was just going to mention somewhere I saw it, and I think it's probably in connection with the planning board and questions about the same issue, resuming in person versus Zoom meetings. And I did see something from town administration that they were going to be focusing on the so-called 10 legislative bodies and getting them back to meeting first. So I'm guessing we're not going to be on the highest on the pecking order to have time and space to meet in person.
Right, that is dependent on the legislature authorizing continued electronic meetings. If they don't authorize it, we're back in person no matter what.
Yes.
That would be interesting to sort out. And I think finally today, I want to thank Graham Durovich for her service on the board. We certainly hope we'll see her in June, but that will at June 22nd and 24th, that will be her last week as her term is ending June 30th. So I just wanted to give a shout out and thank you, Graham. We appreciate everything that you've done.
Thank you. I have enjoyed being part of this and working on the education subcommittee. That was fun to work with Mary and Sarah. And I'm sorry I have to step back, but I think it's a great opportunity with somebody with more time and energy to put into this to help you all.
So we'll look forward to the select board appointing somebody. It's in 2 weeks, I think. They're meeting tonight and then not next week. And so the following week would be the official appointments. Matt's indicating yes, thank you. That would be the 23rd, I guess. 2 weeks, what is it? Yes, 23rd. All right. Anything else before we adjourn? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Gary. Second.
Seconded.
I'll take Graham as a second. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Rich McClure.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Vince or Mary, did Ian ever join the meeting?
No.
Okay, so we had 3 absent for the entire meeting.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Fritz.